Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for attending tonight. I think we've got about 65, 66 online tonight. I would like to acknowledge we've got a couple of councillors in the room. Councillor Martin Smith, St Ives Ward, Councillor Barbara Ward from Gordon Ward. We are expecting the Mayor to drop in midway through this session. A little bit of a different format to usual. I'm going to be the primary speaker. There are some panellists who will answer questions at the end. What I would like you to do is, if there are any questions in relation to Council's legal action in relation to the TOD, start dropping those questions into the chat function as early as possible. Not all of our panellists are available for the whole of the session, so when we get to Q&A at the end, we will deal with those questions first if they're in the system. I would like to recognise the traditional custodians of the land and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. As I say, put your questions in the chat. This presentation is, like I said, a slightly different format. I'll do a couple of slides of introduction and then pass across to the corporate lawyer to give people time to put their questions in the chat. So as when you're putting your questions in the chat, we won't be dealing with specific questions about specific properties, just questions of a general nature. And we'll endeavour to deal with as many questions as we can in the time available. The background to why we're here tonight, we've done 5 of these sessions face-to-face, 1 in each ward. There are a number of people who expressed a little bit of interest in a 6th session. So we've slightly modified the earlier material we presented. When we first started these presentations back in May and then June and July, there were a few unknowns, but on the 1st of July, as an example, the parts of the low and mid-rise housing set came in to effect. So we're dealing now with some knowns rather than some hypotheticals or unknowns that earlier sessions dealt with. So in terms of the material we're presenting tonight, the TOD SEP and the low and mid-rise SEP are part of a package of reforms introduced by the state government to deliver on New South Wales' share of the 1.5 million houses to be delivered by 2029 under the National Housing Accord. Now, 377,000 of those are for New South Wales in the next 5 years. What I will do here is broadly, this presentation is about the low and mid-rise SEP primarily, but it is very hard in some cases to separate the low and mid-rise SEP from the TOD SEP. So there are a couple of slides more in the way of context, just to show you the bigger picture. Now, the TOD SEP, which came into effect in the middle of May, allows housing within 400 metres of 4 precincts: Roseville, Linfield, Killara and Gordon train stations. And the low-rise SEP, or low-rise and mid-rise SEP, has 2 elements: the low-rise element and the mid-rise element. Now, the low-rise element is terrace houses, townhouses and manor houses within 800 metres of all of the train stations and within 800 metres of St Ives Shopping Centre. The mid-rise elements of that are residential flat buildings on R2, R3 and R4 land within 400 metres of Roseville, Killara and Gordon stations. Now, why are we here specifically tonight? Back in April, Council considered a report in relation to the low and mid-rise housing SEP. And because there were a few unknowns at the time, Council resolved to not only make a submission to the Department of Planning, Housing and Infrastructure, but when the department had gone through submissions made through the public process, to have a number of information sessions in all of the various wards. So that's why we rolled out five presentations over the last couple of months. There we go. At this point in time, I will switch across to Council's corporate lawyer, Mr. Jamie Taylor, just to give you a bit of an update on Council's court case. And like I say, as you get questions, start dropping those into the chat function straight away. We won't deal with any questions till we get to the end, but I'll list these this way. Questions about the court case may pop to the top. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you, Andrew, and good evening, everyone. So, as Andrew mentioned, the TODSEP has already come into force, and the news in relation to that is that shortly after it came into force, Council brought proceedings in the Land Environment Court, which essentially challenged the validity of that policy. Now, those proceedings are ongoing, and they haven't actually progressed very far yet. But that will be changing in the next couple of months. So a state environmental planning policy is what's known as delegated legislation. It's a policy that's authorised to be made by the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. And it's a policy that's made by the government, but on the recommendation of the minister. Now, as delegated legislation, it's not possible to challenge the validity or the content of that legislation in the courts because the courts do not, intervene in what is essentially a political matter. But it is possible to challenge a SEP on the basis of whether or not it was made validly, and that is whether the power to make that SEP was properly exercised in accordance with what the Act requires. And the proceedings that were commenced by the Council basically interrogate how that policy was made. There are some mandatory steps in the legislation concerning decisions that have to be made about what consultation is appropriate, consultation within the government, and also public consultation about the content of the policy. And the Council's case is that those requirements weren't satisfied, such that the policy should be found by the court to be invalid. Since we've commenced the proceedings, we've had access to some of the internal documents of the government to do with the making of the TOD, but we're yet to receive the government's answer to our summons. So we don't really know how much of the Council's case are going to be in issue in the proceedings. There isn't any hearing date set yet, but the court has directed the parties to engage in a mediation sometime next month. What form that takes isn't really known yet. There's a number of things that have to happen. One of them is for us to get the government's response to our summons, and that will need to be considered by the Council, including the elected Council. They'll be considering their next steps at the next meeting of Council. If anyone's interested in the detail of Council's case, a copy of the summons is available to be viewed on the Council website, and we are updating the status of proceedings as things develop on the same page. So I'd recommend you look there if you're interested in more information. Thanks very much, and I'll put you back to Andrew.
Thanks, Jamie. I just need to correct something I said earlier. Please put your questions in the Q&A function, not the chat function. That was my mistake. Now, in terms of the background to the low and mid-rise housing SEP, what was put on exhibition in December through to late January or into February was an explanation of intended effect. Council made a submission in relation to that on the 21st of February 2024, and then what was known as a policy refinement paper, which was effectively the Department of Planning's response to submissions made by the public and councils across New South Wales, was released in May, and individual councils all had the benefit of a 1 hour session with the Department of Planning to go over particular issues that councils wanted to reinforce and to just get a broad outline of the feeling of where that possible changes were going to occur to the low and mid-rise housing sector. Now, as I said before, the last presentation we did on this was in fact on the 1st of July. So there was a bit of quick footwork to update as much as we could the information that became available on the day of the presentation. And that was that parts of the low and mid-rise set came in that day. Now, stage 2, which is mainly the mid-rise part of the low and mid-rise housing set, that's still expected to come into effect sometime in September. There has been a little bit of other language used around possible starting dates, which in some cases have been as late as early next year, but sometime in the next 5 or 6 months, we will see the second part of the low and mid-rise housing set. Now, in terms of, this is an overview of what was exhibited. So we were talking about within 400 metres of nominated centres, what's commonly known as commercial areas, or your E1 or mixed use zones. That was intended to go up to 21 stories, approximately, 21 metres, 6 or 7 stories, up to a floor space ratio of 3:1. And R3 development was intended to go up to 21 metres, which again is 6 to 7 stories, with an FSR of again 3:1. Now, other elements of that were within 400 metres of nominated stations. Again, E1 and mixed use, 16 metres up to 4 to 5 stories, floor space ratio of 2:1. And on your R3 zones, which is your common medium density zone, townhouse zone, up to 16 stories, so 16 metres, 4 to 5 stories, with a floor space ratio of 2:1. Now, the low rise elements of what was put in exhibition was on all R2 land. You could have within 800 metres of nominated centres. That's all the train stations plus the knives. You could have terrace houses and townhouses up to 9.5 metres, 0.7:1 floor space ratio, and manor houses 9.5 metres high and a floor space ratio of 0.8:1. Now, on all R2 land outside of all R2 land outside of the TOD zones, you could have dual occupancies on the basis of DA merit assessment, with exempted complying provisions of that state policy applying from the 1st of July next year, 2025, unless council has implemented its own, particularly lot size and lot frontage provisions. Now, that provision, that last dot point, came in on the 1st of July. So that's no longer an unknown. Now, the policy refinement paper, as I said before, at the time it reflected all of the changes that the government was intending to introduce. And the policy refinement paper, for example, didn't deal with any provisions or there was no conversation there about particularly dual occupancy. So what we saw was basically what was exhibited, brought into play on the 1st of July. And as I said before, there was engagement with the relevant councils. Now, in terms of bit of a difficult slide to read, but some of you would have seen this in earlier presentations. So the second or the middle column is the provisions that were put on exhibition, and the last column, the third column, was provisions in the policy refinement paper that the government was at that time contemplating changes. Now, the first row is your R4 and R3 zones within 0 to 400 metres of your stations and centres, and the bottom row is residential flat buildings in R4 zones and R3 zones in that 400 to 800 metre zone from stations. So what we saw, for example, was the height of development in the R3 and R4 zones in that 0 to 400 range went up from 21 to 22 metres, but the floor space ratio went down from 3:1 down to 2.2:1. And for shop top housing, you saw the provision go up to 24 metres. Now that was in the refinement paper. Now, in terms of that 400 to 800 metre zone from centres and stations, you were looking at 16 metres was exhibited. It went in the policy refinement paper, went up to 17.5. The floor space ratio went from 2 to 1 down to 1.5 to 1. No minimum lot size and no minimum frontage provisions there. Now, key elements of the policy refinement paper, or key objectives that the government sought to resolve, was there was criticism about the lack of collaboration. So the policy refinement paper and a meeting with all councils was intended to effectively tick that box. A big change that came out of the policy refinement paper was that the government intended that that policy no longer apply to the enterprise zones, the E1, E2 or MU1 zones. So that was a big change. One of the reasons for that was that it was intended to address heritage. Now, across Sydney, it was the proposition put by the department that the bulk of heritage in most local government areas to which the policy applied occurred within the MU1, within the lower mid-rise core area, the 400 metres, and in the commercial zones. Whereas in Ku-ring-gai, the bulk of our heritage occurs outside of the commercial zones, with some exception, but the bulk of our heritage is in fact still impacted by the policy because it's not within those E1, E2 zones. There was some land excluded in relation to flooding, bushfire, and as we saw from that table I put up earlier, there was a bit of a recalibration of floor space and height for mid-rise standards. And there was a change of reference to the apartment design guide. It's a consideration rather than an absolute as it is at the present time. Bit of a deeper dive on why the E1, E2 and MU1 zones were excluded. Across Sydney, the department calculated that already there was greater height and floor space on average within the commercial areas to which the policy applied. So there was no benefit in retaining those zones within the policy. The policy effectively only applies to 5.5% of the land area to which the overall policy applies. So again, the government appeared to take the view that it wasn't giving up very much by excluding those. And it also acknowledged, as lots of submissions, including this council's, made, that those commercial zones effectively present a very good opportunity for master planning, community-based master planning to get better outcomes. So for all those reasons, and I'm sure there's some others, but effectively the employment zones were dropped out of the low and mid-rise housing policy. Now, this is the reference to the particular state policy relating to dual occupancies. So it was came into effect from the 1st of July, published very late June. So that's available on the government legislation website for those who want to do a deeper dive on that. And there'll be links to those things on Council's website. So what effectively this means is that some parts of the EIE were excised from the remainder of the package for early implementation, and stage one, which is the dual occ and semi-detached buildings, permitted in all low density zones across New South Wales from R2 zones from 1 July. Now, in terms of the low-rise housing code, I won't go into too much detail on that, but what it does, what the code allows is under the exempt and complying code, you can effectively get an approval for dual occupancy by way of complying development. Now, that pathway has been switched off for 13 local government areas, which did not have existing dual occupancy provisions in their LEPs, and those councils have been given until the 1st of July 2025 to introduce those by way of an ordinary planning proposal. And after the 1st of, or on the 1st of July 2025, it's expected that the exempt and compliant pathway will automatically turn back on for those 13 councils. Now, we were only one of 13. It's places like Tamworth, Strathfield, parts of the old Ku-ring-gai Council, Albury, Ballina, Cowra, Hornsby, Inner West, Lismore, Liverpool, Mossman, Murray River. So there's a couple, bit of a mixed bag, and for various reasons they didn't have the sorts of provisions that government was anticipating or looking for to allow those exempt and complying pathways to turn on immediately. Now, in terms of stage one, which is the dual locks, there were some exclusions, and council's earlier submissions in relation to the low and mid-rise housing set dealt with all of these. But you've had some exclusions in relation to bushfire, flood-prone land, coastal wetlands, littoral forest, or coastal vulnerable areas. Land located close to goods pipelines or aircraft noise areas. Land in the TOD has been excluded. The expectation there is that government will be looking for development to achieve the higher provisions established by the TOD rather than simple dual occupancies. There was some areas of particular flooding and bushfire risk. That's the Hawkesbury, Blue Mountains, and Wallandilly, and everybody will be aware how often they come up in the newsreels, unfortunately, for their flooding and fire issues. There was no suitable R2 land identified in Bathurst at all, and some land around the Botany Industrial Park will switch on at stage 2 only, not stage 1. Now, in terms of what this means, the concentric circles that are shaded out around the train stations and St Ives, that's the 800 metre zone, and the yellow areas are effectively all of the R2 low density residential land. Now, there'll be some areas up around North Warringah, places like that are in those conservation zones, so they are excluded. Now, it's council's view that there's still impacts on, and it's arguably the case that there are unsatisfactory impacts on trees, heritage, biodiversity, streetscape, bushfire, evacuation, and accessibility. Now, this is the typology of what type of development happens in the R2 zoning Ku-ring-gai at the moment. So it's quite large garden settings, large canopy trees, plenty of space for large canopy trees in a plan view as well. And under the low and mid-rise housing set, you'll end up with a typology more like this, given the narrow frontages, minimal setbacks, and the bulk of council's DCP provisions effectively being overridden. You'll end up with significant loss of gardens, trees, and significant change to streetscapes. Now, in terms of the low and mid-rise housing set, so what we're talking about there is within 800 metres of all of the train stations and St Ives, which is the blue shaded areas up and down the railway spine, and again St Ives. You can get the manor house style development. Now, again, similar impacts to the dual occupancies, trees, heritage, biodiversity, streetscape, and accessibility. Now, we don't have a lot of manor houses in Ku-ring-gai, but this is from down the back of Gordon. So it's two on top of two. And again, in plan view, a reasonable size lot with plenty of space for large canopy trees and setback from the street and sheltering from the street itself. Now, under the low and mid-rise housing set, a manor house typology is more like this. So built very close to the street, not a lot of space for street tree planting. In some cases, you will end up with underground parking. You may not always, but not a lot of space in the rear yard for private landscaping either. Now, in terms of the terraces and townhouses, again, that's within 800 metres of all of the train stations and St Ives, again, the shaded area. Now, this is an example from Ku-ring-gai down in West Lindfield, down near the old Screen Australia site. And this is the type of terrace house, townhouse development you could expect under the low and mid-rise housing set as it was exhibited. Again, built right up to the street, Not a lot of room for street tree planting at all. In plan view, not a lot of area for large trees or trees of any sort, really. Now, in terms of the residential flat buildings, that's again within 400 metres of those couple of stations, Wahronga, Warrawee, Pymble and St Ives Centre. That's it there. It's 400 to 800 ring around St Ives. This is what we have at the moment. Generally a 5-storey typology built on roughly half of the site, so plenty of room for deep soil planting. And again, particularly as you go further north up around Warrawee, some of the older style development that's been there for 12, 15 years. Some of the canopy trees are getting to the point where they're growing over the Pacific Highway. So you are over time getting very good canopy cover. And again, in plan, over time, plenty of time for large trees to grow, particularly where there's double setbacks between sites. Now, in terms of the policy talks about railway station precincts, which is all of our listed train stations, and it talks about prospective town centres. And I've used the wording out of the policy because I think at the present time there is a little bit of ambiguity, and I'll show this in a map example later. But people will have different views about what is the Gordon Shopping Mall. Well, I think of the Gordon Shopping Mall as across the road, one building with Woolworths in it. Now, does the policy apply? Does it measure distances from the Gordon Shopping Mall, or does it measure it from the edge of the commercial zone, which was what we originally expected? Again, if you live in Linfield, the Linfield Shops on Linfield Avenue has a very precise meaning for people down there, as does the St Ives Shopping Village. I wouldn't take the St Ives Shopping Village to include, for example, some of the smaller shops on Stanley Street. And what do we mean by the Turramurra shops? When you get to Turramurra, and it's quite a complex urban fabric. You've effectively got 3 segments. The Kissing Point roadside, between the highway and the railway, and on the western side of the railway line, for example. Now, this use of terminology becomes important later on, and I'll show you when we get to some slides. Now, we did in fact ask those questions of the Department of Planning, and I won't bother explaining the words. I will go to a map. What they said to us was that it was intended to map the commercial zones, and then on a case-by-case basis, applicants would have to measure for themselves the walking distance from the edge of a zone boundary. So again, I'll show you this in map form. This is Gordon. So you are measuring. Do you go all the way up to the commercial land on the corner of Motorvale Road, or do you just look at what we all know as the Gordon Centre, or is it the more intense retail strip? So where you measure your zone boundaries from, quite significantly increases the area that falls into various policies. Like I said, particularly as you go up into this mixed use zone up here, everybody who's wandered up on the highway up along here would know there's not a lot of service retail, and the core really is down here. So it becomes important in some cases where you're measuring things from. Again, in St Ives, I would call this the core area of St Ives Shopping Village, including some of the smaller shops on the north side of Motorvale Road. But when you talk about the St Ives Shopping Village, you're really talking about the land on the south side of Motorvale Road off those Stanley Street shops. So it means a lot on the ground, and it's still a little bit undefined, I think is the best way to describe it. In Linfield, a little bit the same. The Linfield shops, we're talking about, Linfield Avenue over here. The bulk of the commercial area in Linfield is in fact on the western side of the highway. So I don't think it's the intention that they're just talking about the Linfield Avenue shops, but that is unclear in the policy refinement statement, because I would have thought they would be measuring, from the outer edge of the commercial zone. And again, what are we talking about? What are the Turramurra shops? As I said earlier, 3 different segments of Turramurra, and where you measure your 400 and 800s from becomes quite significant. Now, the inclusion criteria for stations and centres was not particularly complex by our understanding. It was a bus service frequency of 1 per hour. It was a train service of at least 1 every 30 minutes. It was train travel. The exhibited version of the EIE had 30 minutes from the CBD, but the the policy refinement paper added in North Sydney and Chatswood. It's talking about full line supermarket of at least 2,000 square metres. And as I said, the regular bus service being determined to be 1 an hour. At a very high level, there was some assessment supposedly of what was determined essential infrastructure, which is water, sewage, stormwater, and electricity. We would say, I mean, all except stormwater here is provided by the state, but we would certainly say that our stormwater system, and anybody in Ku-ring-gai who's sat through a couple of recent heavy downpours lately would question the veracity of the claim that the stormwater system is up to scratch. Road infrastructure, those issues were generally not considered to be of any nature that would see sites excluded. They were seen to be council responsibility. And I've talked about the train service and the bus service. But I mean, anyone who catches the train regularly up and down the North Shore line would fully appreciate that, for example, you get a much higher level of service at Gordon than you do at Killara. You get a good service at Linfield and pretty good at Roseville, but not all stations are the same on the train line, and the same applies to a lesser extent for some of the northern train stations. Now, in terms of what both policies mean for Ku-ring-gai, I've got a slide for the whole of Ku-ring-gai, and I've got a slide for each of the individual centres. So what we're talking about is impacted dwellings across the whole of the local government area of just under 24,000 under the low and mid-rise housing SEP. And we've used 2 hypothetical or theoretical uptake rates here. I've used 100%, and then I've used 35% down the bottom. So what you're talking about at 100% take up, new dwellings, 99,000, and that's under the low and mid-rise, and under the TOD SEPs, which is the 4 southern stations, another 18,000, and that's at the lower end. If you do hypothetical calculations on yield, or actual calculations on yield, you'll come up with higher than 18,000. That's just the number that the government used in a lot of their literature and publications. So what you're looking at there is total new residents in the order of, at 35% take up, 98,000. And total new dwellings at 100% take up of 117, new residents at 2.4 dwellings per hectare at 281,000. So you're talking about at 100% take up, more than doubling of the current Ku-ring-gai population. Now, all of these slides are available, most of them are currently available on the website, and there's been a couple of changes for this presentation. So this presentation will also be available in the next couple of days, as will be this recording. Now, in no particular order, though I took this one because it wasn't on the train line, what this means for St Ives, you've got 766 dwellings in that ring around St Ives for the low and mid-rise housing SEP. You've got potential new dwellings, that's the ring there, that's the 400 to 800. So you've got 766 dwellings impacted. At a 35% take-up rate, you could get another 2,395 new dwellings, just over 5,000 residents. At 100% take-up, your 2,300 goes to 6,842, and your total new residents goes up to 14,300. So again, just in that, the shaded areas around St Ives, and there is some exclusions. We've excluded any of that recent development which is the unshaded development on that plan. In terms of what it means, and I think we're going from north to south here. Again, we're talking about just the area that's been impacted. So half of Wahroonga doesn't actually occur in, or part of the catchment doesn't occur in Ku-ring-gai. So this is just south of the freeway, effectively, or on the southeast side of the freeway. Impacted dwellings is 514 under the low and mid-rise housing set, assuming 35% take up. That's about another 1,430 odd new dwellings, 3,000 just over new residents, and at 100% take up, that goes to 4,100 and 8,620 new residents. Now for Warrawee, now what you'll notice here is that I haven't shaded, or part of the circles aren't shaded. So where there's been overlap, I'll go back to the last slide. The area of overlap here is included in Wahroonga. So when you go down to Warrawee, it's excluded from the calculations because of the overlap, and likewise Turramurra will be excluded. So these numbers in the column only occur or only apply to that central area in the plans. So within that segment of that circle, there's 392 impacted dwellings. At a take-up rate of 35%, you're looking at about 1,600 new dwellings. At 100% take-up, 4,600 dwellings. And the population goes from 3,500 up to 9,700 for that Warrawee, just that central segment. You jump across to Turramurra. This is all of the land within the circle. So you've got 938 dwellings impacted. The low and mid-rise housing set, 35% take-up gives you 2,477 dwellings. At 100% take-up ratio, that goes to 7,079 new dwellings, and your population goes from 5,200 to just 150 under 15,000 new dwellings. For Pymble, again, this circle sits by itself. It crosses Mainavar Road, but doesn't quite touch the Gordon Circle. So what you've got in that slide is 740 impacted dwellings in the donut. At 35% take up, you go from 1,691 new dwellings. At 100% take up, you could see 4,833, and your population goes from just over 3,500 up to 10,150 odd for Pymble. Now you go to Gordon. Again, this will be everything in the circle. You've got 613 impacted dwellings at 35% take-up ratio under the low and mid-rise housing set. You could potentially see another 1,207 new dwellings. At 100% take-up ratio, you would see 3,448 new dwellings, and your population would be in the range of 2,500 to 7,241. You drop down to Killara. Killara sits between a couple of centres. So again, on the north it's excluded, and on the south those numbers will occur in the Linfield slide. So you've got 652 impacted dwellings. At 35% take-up ratio, you could see another 1,061 dwellings under the low and mid-rise housing set. At 100% take-up ratio, that would go to 3,031, and your population goes from about 2,200 at 35% take-up ratio, take-up rate to 6,365. When you slide across to Linfield, again, this will be the whole of the circle. You have 855 impacted dwellings at 100% take-up. That should say 35% take-up. You would see 1,228 dwellings. At 100% take-up, you go to 3,509 dwellings, and your new resident population sits somewhere between 2,579 and 7,369. Now, like I said, that's the whole of the donut ring. So by the time you drop down to Roseville, the overlap with Lingfield is excluded from these figures, as is anything south of Boundary Road, which is in Willoughby. So again, just that central part of that circle. 531 impacted dwellings at 35% take-up rate. You've got 935 new dwellings with just under 2,000 resident population. At 100% take-up rate, you've got 2,671 new dwellings, which at 2.1 persons per dwelling is 5,609 new residents. Now, a couple of slides on risk. Now, council made a lot of submissions on these, and as I pointed out when I gave some earlier overview of the stage 1 dual lock provisions that were introduced, there was some credence given by the government to submissions that people made. So there is some bushfire prone land that has been excluded, and some other issues that would have to be addressed through DAs. Similar with flood risks, there were some exclusions there, and again, a fair bit of detail to be addressed at DA stage rather than at a high level stage. Now, this is a complex map, but it's on council's website, and this shows the different catchments that apply to the low and mid-rise housing set. So we're doing some detailed flood mapping, but the blue areas are the ones that have been completed, and the other ones are the blue. The purple or the mauve and the green are in various stages of completion. So we don't have a full set of data that would have informed flood mapping areas anyway. Now, in terms of evacuation risk, I don't want to dwell too much on that, but particularly as you get north up into particularly around Bobbin Head and around parts of South Turramurra, you do get local congestion in periods of evacuation. And what that will do is effectively bottleneck back towards the highway. Now, there was some exclusions, but we would expect that some of those problems aren't necessarily resolved by exclusions and minor changes to the policy when it's stage 1 was introduced and when stage 2 is introduced later this year. So we would say that at this point in time, some of council's concerns haven't been adequately or fully addressed. These don't so much apply to Ku-ring-gai, but there's some other exclusions in relation to coastal management, contaminated lands, SSF8, landslip pipelines and dangerous industries. Now, I'll just touch on heritage, and this map applies to all of the centres and St Ives. So what you've got in the red shaded areas is the heritage conservation areas and individual items. There's more than 4,000 impacted by the 2 policies, and there's a disproportionate impact up and down the railway spine, because no surprise, that's where the bulk of Ku-ring-gai development occurred in the early stages. You get to a place like Killara, and 83% of land within 400 metres is actually either heritage listed or within heritage conservation areas. So quite across the LGA, quite a significant impact from the policies in relation to heritage. In relation to biodiversity, bit of a special location, Ku-ring-gai. The biodiversity comes up in all of council survey work as being something that the community is proud of and wants to protect. We have 7 endangered ecological communities. 2 of those are critical. That's the blue gum high forest and the Sydney turpentine ironbark forest. Lots of other threatened flora and fauna. 700 odd native plant species, 300 vertebrate species, numerous invertebrate species, and all of those provide critical ecological services for not only Ku-ring-gai, but quite often the rest of Sydney. At a very high level, development of this scale and density will lead to significant increases in hard paved surfaces, and that will increase the quantity of runoff and quite often reduces the quality of runoff into catchments. And you will see with increased clearance, particularly under the low and mid-rise housing set. Some of the stepping stones by which wildlife would traverse between east and west, from national park to national park and north to south. You'll see some of those stepping stones start to disappear with these policies being implemented. Now, in terms of urban canopy, in 2022, Council did an urban forest strategy, and we had a goal. Ku-ring-gai is blessed with quite significant and quite high levels of canopy cover. Council had aimed to overall increase canopy cover from 45% to 49%, and within R2 zones to aim for an increase from 35 to 40. Now, given that in some cases you're looking for canopy cover in that dual occupancy space of, in the order of 15 to 20%, Council's 2022 targets, which at the time were actually, while they seem high, they were very consistent with similar targets coming out of the Greater Cities Commission and the Greater Sydney Commission before that. These objectives are now almost completely unattainable. Now, what we did, there's a bit of a difference here. I alluded to some exclusions in the low and mid-rise housing set. So when I gave earlier versions of this presentation, we were looking at various levels of take-up through the low and mid-rise housing set of somewhere between 8,000, 16,000 and 32,000 trees being lost at 25, 50 and 100% take-up rates as a consequence of the low and mid-rise housing set. Now, with those exclusions, those numbers go down a little bit. Your 32 goes to 25,600. Your 16 and your 8,000 trees drop down to 12,800 and 6,400 at 25, 50 and 100% take-up. So you're still talking about significant tree loss will occur simply by implementation of these policies. Just a quick snapshot of bushfire, just to remind people of where we sit. Fingers of bushland extend into the urban area on both the east and western flank, and particularly around Turramurra and up into Roseville. Lesser extent it affects Gordon, but a lot of people choose to live on the urban interface for very obvious reasons. Again, there was some minor changes in relation to bushfire, for which we saw some of those things coming out of council submissions, as well as other submissions from council. Now, like I said before, what you've got is canopy targets for dual occupancy in that 15 to 25% range, and there is no requirement to retain any existing vegetation. So on demolition day, you could see a site potentially, depending on where existing trees sit, with absolutely no canopy cover left at all, no large trees, and you will only get back that 15 to 25% over time. We would also say that the policy, as a rule, doesn't take account of the ridgetop nature of Ku-ring-gai. And again, I've mentioned that impact on stormwater, flooding and downstream water health. Now, we would say it's going to be very difficult, notwithstanding the density is going up under both these policies. We would say that urban heat will increase and reduce habitat and amenity for all sorts of wildlife, as well as the people who live here. Now, a bit of a busy slide, and you can do lots of things with this slide, but what it shows is that what you see out of the census is, when you concentrate development on the spine, like we have done over the last 15 or 20 years, or in fact longer, you see more journeys to work and less car ownership, not by very much the car ownership issue, but you see more journeys to work on the train system. But under the low and mid-rise housing set, what you're doing is you're putting a lot of development away from the spine, as well as the development that is already on the spine, and particularly down south in the four southern Todd precincts. And you're forcing all of these people to try and get mass transit in the spine. So you're in effect completely flipping the choice of transport to and from work. So you'll see more pressure for parking, up and down the spine around railway stations and bus routes, and not necessarily under this policy any more off-street parking, commuter parking arrangements. So again, you can look at the detail and explanation about what those slides actually mean, but that's it in a bit of a nutshell. Now, some high-level observations about infrastructure. Again, there was no assessment, and these observations here are largely about Todd, particularly Gordon. What you're seeing in those Todd stations is the equivalent traffic movements that would come from having two full-line supermarkets in each of the Todd stations. Now, we did some internal testing around Gordon for previous levels of development that council had planned for, and we think there's only capacity for about another 2,500 dwellings in Gordon before you start to seriously stress the road network. And all of the Todds are looking for somewhere in the range of 4,500 to 5,000 odd new dwellings. So what you're looking at is effectively enough traffic that you would effectively or theoretically generate the need for an additional lane on each side of the Pacific Highway for its entire length, and we know that's A, impossible, and B, illogical. And but that's the type of impact you're talking about. Now, in terms of open space, council's had an open space acquisition strategy in place for 15 odd years now. We've acquired 25,000 square metres of new parks. We have a new development pro rata per capita. Now, what we will see is significantly decreased opportunity and increased costs for that as the Todd, particularly the Todd SEP rolls out, but to a lesser extent in the low and mid-rise housing SEP as well, simply because of the significant uplift in land values, as well as fragmented opportunity for consolidated acquisition. Now, in terms of community facilities and libraries, council did some strategy work back in 2018, and at that point in time, we're about 10,000 square metres short of community space and library space. And we won't go to the full take up under the two SEPs in the short term, but it's theoretically possible in the longer term. That's estimated population of 28,000, not currently accounted for, 280,000, sorry. So your 10,000 square metre shortfall in 2018 goes to a shortfall of somewhere in the order of 33,000 to 40,000 square metres of community space and libraries. Again, don't want to dwell on too much on this one. Large parts of council's stormwater network really only have capacity for the 5% event, which is what in the old parlance was known as the 1 in 20 year event. None of those issues were addressed in the feasibility or viability as far as we can understand. There was broad claims made about the adequacy of the sewage system, but in a 12-month period from 1 January 23 to 1 January 24, Sydney Water itself self-reported 50 sewer leaks, and some of those would have been reasonably significant. So, a system operating within design constraints and acceptable tolerances still has 50 sewer leaks being considered acceptable in a 12-month period. I touched on earlier with that map about our catchments. We don't yet have full flooding data for all or most of our local catchments. Now, there has been a little bit of, I'll say, disagreement between various parties about something known as non-refusal standards. Now, a lot has been said about both policies, Todd SEP and the low and mid-rise SEP, allowing merit assessment. But the policy is very clear that the preeminent planning controls are height and floor space under the state policy, and that you cannot refuse applications for reasons of amenity, local character, biodiversity, all the sorts of things that are addressed in most councils' ordinary LEPs and DCPs. You can't refuse developments on the basis of those if it otherwise stops somebody getting their full height and FSR. Now, I would expect that when stage 2 of the low and mid-rise housing set comes out, then the non-refusal standards will be effectively treated the same way as they were in the TODSEP, and also they will be dealt with in the stage 1 dual occupancy provisions. So we would say that claims made by the government and the department about the opportunity for genuine merit assessment, taking into account those heritage biodiversity type considerations, is not consistent with council's legal or professional planning advice, both independent and from council staff. So we might see that issue play out, unfortunately, through the court process over the next couple of years or so, not just with Ku-ring-gai Council, but other councils as well. That is the end of the formal section of the presentation. So what I'll do here is I'll turn across to Will to pass questions around. And like I say, if we can deal with some of those legal questions first, if there is any.
Great. Can you hear me okay? Thank you. Okay, my name is Will. I'm from Council and I'm here to help with some of the questions. Now, we've got 11 questions in the Q&A box. So if you have any additional, please add them and we'll get to them as soon as we can. So, Andrew, the first question we had in from anonymous attendee, how would Council manage height creep by developers amalgamating sites and rezoning the entire lot via state government to get approval?
That's a little bit of a complex question. What I didn't deal with in this presentation was there was some separate SEPA amendments back in December, which under certain circumstances give developers floor space bonuses of up to 30% of height and floor space for the provision of additional affordable housing beyond what's mandated in the TODSEP, and in other policy settings, not necessarily a lower mid-rise housing set by the TODSEP yet. If you get a development side of capital investment value, which doesn't include your land value, of more than $75 million, they could go straight to assessment by the Department of Planning. So there is a couple of scenarios with a couple of minor changes to legislation where you could see, I won't say so much height creep, but certainly approval by assessment by people other than council. Most of these proposals would already go through one of the planning panels anyway because of simply the scale of them. Height creep, there's still the capacity for, under some circumstances, depending on which provisions you're relying on, variations under council's LEP, the 4.6 variation, but I wouldn't say that would lead to height creep overall, but there is significant potential for additional height for affordable housing.
Thank you. The next question, again from anonymous attendee, the proposed change applies to R2 zone. What could be council position to look at dual occupancy in a C4 zone dual frontage?
At the moment, the low and mid-rise SEP does not apply to the C4 zone, and the C4 zone was particularly put in place to deal with evacuation, bushfire, and ecological reasons. So at this point in time, it's been excluded from the policy entirely.
Okay, thank you. Does this mean compulsory takeovers by developers within 800 metres of stations along the line? Do owners have a choice?
There is no such thing as compulsory acquisition by developers of private land. It is always going to be with the consent of property owners, and in some cases, as we've seen with amalgamation of sites, neighbours getting together.
Okay, thank you. Nearly all the Federation houses are within 400 metres of each station along the line. Does this mean that these will be destroyed and our history lost forever?
Under the TODSEP and the way we think the low and mid-rise housing SEP stage 2 will roll out, heritage items, individually listed heritage items are excluded from the policy, but heritage conservation areas are not. So you could see some theoretical removal of heritage buildings or Federation homes within 400 metres of train stations, yes.
Right, okay. Next question. For Warrawee, how do we go from impacted dwellings to 1,691? So I think it's, where did you get the number from for the impacted dwellings?
We'll
For Warrawee, this one was?
Yep. Well, I'll answer for Warrawee, but the principle will be the same for all of the centres. So what we've got in Warrawee is 392 existing dwellings. So what we've done is calculated the theoretical yield would take us to 1,621. So and I'll give you an example of how you get that high. You've seen some sites marketed down in Gordon, for example, where a regular size block, a little bit over, could currently has one house on it, could get you, 29 or 30, depending on how big it is. Now that's at a 35% take-up rate, and at the 100% take-up rate, you get up to 4,600. Now we've used a occupancy ratio of 2.1 persons per dwelling. Now that usually reflects a smaller dwelling typology, like a house, like a unit. In a house, you might get an occupancy ratio of up at 2.4, 2.5, 2.6. So yeah, based on lot size, notional yield, units per lot, I think we worked on about 85 dwellings per, what do we work on? 85 square metres per dwelling. So that gets you to 1,600.
Thank you. Next question. If the house next door is within 400 metres, but your house is not, can your house be included in a developer's purchase, or is it subject to different rules?
Now, what we've got is the TODSEP has been gazetted. So the very precise impact or inclusion or exclusion of properties is mapped as part of the state policy. There is not at the moment precise mapping of any of the low and mid-rise housing zones, and that's why I had those slides up indicating before how important a definition of where you were taking a measurement from was. We are told that we will get very precise mapping of the commercial area from which the 400 is measured, but then on a case-by-case basis, you could see individual people make a case. Now, what we've used here is we've used concentric circles. Now, and I'll go to a different centre other than Warrawee. In fact, I'll go back to this one. Where are we? Go back to, no, wrong direction. Sorry about that. Now, we've mapped concentric circles. So for Taramara, for example, we just map concentric circles. But depending on where you define the boundary from which you're measuring, you will end up with a blob shape, not a concentric circle. So when I've calculated yields in these slides, by the time you actually measure that boundary and that boundary from, there, it's going to be, a different shape than the circle. So it really depends on from where you're measuring and the wording of the set when it finally comes out. But don't take the concentric rings as being gospel. They will mirror whatever shape ends up being gazetted as the measuring point. I think that was a very poor explanation, but I hope you understood it.
Okay.
So yeah, this shape is going to be more like.
Yes. Yeah. But I think the point you just made about it really depends on what the specific wording of the set will be once it comes out.
And where you're measuring from, yes.
Yeah, great. So it's a little bit of watch this space on that one. Is there any wildlife impacted at the points close to the railway corridor?
Well, I think the short answer to that is yes. And I talked before about stepping stones, what you've got through some of the large bushland areas. And I don't think I've got a slide that shows that very well. This one's not too bad. You've got some large park areas, and through large gardens, people have large gardens, large trees, park on Worsley Road. There is a lot of movement up and down the railway line, a lot of large trees in the railway corridor. A lot of trees on private land will start to disappear. And I don't know that, I think I might have deleted a slide by mistake. I think I did. Something like 50%, bit over 50% of the large trees in Ku-ring-gai are in fact on private land. And you will never get those back on public land or in the new plantings that will occur on private land. So a lot of the stepping stones that the wildlife use will disappear under these policy initiatives.
Sorry, I've just realised I was on mute. Has anyone actually counted the number of mature trees on residential property to estimate the large numbers of trees lost to development? And I think you did allude to that in one of your slides.
There was a slide on that. Yeah, this is a slide I was talking about. I probably didn't talk to it enough. What this pie chart shows is that of all the trees, canopy trees, and we're measuring everything there above 3 metres, 49% are on private land, which is the purple. 42% sit on council-owned land, and some of those, frankly, sit in very large reserves at the edge of the local government area. And the other category, bit over 7%, schools, Commonwealth land, things like that. Now, we've excluded from that slide national parks and things like that. So all of that is on land, and a lot of this is under threat from the policies, the private land. Now, this is where we calculated trees. We have, in fact, calculated within a reasonable tolerance the number of trees that will be lost under the modified policy as somewhere between 6,400 and 26,000 trees. Now, there simply is not the capacity on public land in road reserves to replace those trees. And when you take trees out of a development site or out of a large residential site that's got good setbacks, good deep soil, you're not going to be replacing in a townhouse on a couple of hundred square metres trees, large trees that were sitting on a 1,200, 1,500 square metre block. So your larger trees will disappear forever, and your new canopy over time will be trees in that sort of 3, 5, 8 metres maximum, depending on how big people's plots of land are. And in some cases, there won't be capacity at all for large trees on some of those smaller blocks.
Okay. Next question. If the development is next to stations, won't people want to use public transport, which is at their doorstep, rather than their cars?
That really depends on the nature of the journey to work they're doing. And if you want to have a look tomorrow, do a deeper dive on this and have a look at what this slide means. You do, in this core area, get a slightly reduced car ownership rate, about 10% less. Now, just because people don't use a car to drive to work, they jump on the train, doesn't mean that they don't still need to own a car, and doesn't mean they won't use it to drive kids to sport or whatever on the weekend. Now, I think Joe Piccoli's turned on his light. He's our strategic traffic engineer. So, Joe, if you want to supplement that answer, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And Andrew's right. The core principle is correct, that if you've got the housing located around the station, then predominantly those people are going to use public transport more than would those other people in those fringes. Where we, I guess, have an issue is where the housing is located outside the centres. Those people are going to be largely dependent on using cars for largely all their journeys, whether they're going to the station, where they need to go to shops or whatever. They'll be highly car dependent, whereas the housing along that spine is relatively efficient from a traffic generating perspective. But even in that example that Andrew showed in Gordon, where we did some testing of 2,500 dwellings, they were all mostly high density and some medium density. And even at 2,500 levels, it's kind of testing the capacity of the road network. So the numbers in the TOD and in the lower mid-rise are much higher than that. So the principle's okay, but we just need to also think about or plan for the infrastructure to support that level of growth, which is quite substantial.
Thanks very much, Joe.
Thanks, Joe. Next question. What is the likelihood that stage 2 of the low mid-rise housing reforms will be significantly watered down or not progressed at all? Does council consider it a foregone conclusion that these changes will occur?
I think it's a little bit hard for me to crystal ball that one, Will. We have been told stage 2 will come out in September. There was a little bit of a recalibration, you can call it a watering down, between the exhibited material over December into February, as opposed to what was put out in the policy review paper. And that, for people who want to go and have a look tomorrow, is this slide coming up. We'll get there eventually. That one. So we saw this is what was exhibited, and we went from 21 to 22 metres. Floor space dropped from 3 to 2.2 to 1. Now we're not expecting that to radically change now. Whether you like the principles that are reflected on this side or not, the point that a lot of councils made was that 21 metres and a 3-storey building, 21 metres and a 3-to-1 floor space ratio simply didn't work. Now you may not like a 22 or 24 metre building at 2.2 to 1, but you can make that work from a functionality and design, solar access purpose. So we don't anticipate watering down or non-introduction of these provisions, but stranger things have happened.
Thank you. Next question. Is council aware of any block purchases of land by developers that have actually gone through?
We have been tracking those as much as we can. There's a lot of activity on various commercial real estate websites. We're aware of about in the order of 30 amalgamated site or groups of parcels that are on the market. We're not aware that any have gone through. There's lots of places that appear to have been optioned up off market, but we're not aware of any cases where actual property transactions have occurred. We will find out about those in due course. They usually take a couple of months to flow through various government data sites.
Great, thank you. Next question, a bit of a longer one. When responding to the new state policy, has any consideration been given by the council to the way people travel, use public infrastructure? With increased number of people working from home these days, the negative impact on public transportation spine may not be as great as expected. Underground car parking is actually could be a great idea and something that may actually benefit the community long term, as long as there is dedicated areas for block residents, visitors, and the general public. I think this might be for Joseph.
Yeah, I can come on. Thanks, Will. We are aware of obviously changing travel patterns due to working from home. And as we heard Howard Collins this morning on the radio talking about saying that Tuesday is a new Monday. Obviously Monday and Friday are popular working from home days, but nonetheless, Tuesdays and Thursdays and now Wednesdays are kind of creeping up as your peak days. And when we do our transport impact assessment, we normally assess impacts on either Tuesdays or Thursdays as being the peak days. So we can expect still significant load on the network on those days. And we all know from our own experience that Saturdays have a particular strain on the network, with shopping and sports happening. We also assess that. So we are considering that, yes, while people may work from home at times, you still have the days where you have your standard peaks, and we do assess those in our transport impact assessments, and hence all those results have come out that we've fed back to the state government.
Great, thanks, Joe. So yes, we are taking into consideration the changes in behaviours. Next question. I think, Andrew, you've kind of touched on this. Does council think that September is likely for the SEP, or will it be delayed until 2025?
I think, well, that was largely out of our capacity to predict. We had been told September. There was at one stage 2 different dates on the Department of Planning's website. They appear to have settled on September 2024. But I did have a meeting with some departmental staff late last week that alluded to early 2025. So September is only a month away.
Yep.
We're expecting it in September, but it really could be any time. There was a fair bit of submission and interest in the low and mid-rise housing set, particularly stage 2. So if it was a little bit longer, I wouldn't be surprised.
So
The key elements of the policy with the TOD and the dual-locks are already been implemented.
Sure. So a bit of watch this space, I suppose, and when that does come out, we will be letting people know. The next question: given the anticipated increased energy use and adverse impact on biodiversity under the SEP, does the council have any interest in leading by example to use the proposed Linfield hub to showcase a sustainable high-rise that are highly energy efficient and water smart? This can help bring awareness and encourage residents, developers to do the same. In turn, it will minimize adverse impact of increased population in the area.
I think that's a very loaded question. All I would say there, Will, is that I think that was the Mayor wanting to come in, Will.
Okay. Mr. Mayor?
Oh, sorry. Sorry, no, that I must have pressed the wrong button somewhere. I was looking at something and really surprised by an email. Totally. Yeah, sorry.
Right, yeah, I'll have a crack at that question then.
Okay, thank you.
A number of members of the community will be aware of the difficulty council had with the withdrawal or the untimely withdrawal of some funding by the state government for that project. Council is still doing its best to keep that project as a live project. So all of those things are really going to have to be worked out with the prospective proponents that we're working with at the moment, Will.
Right. Okay, just looking at the next question. Does it mean that if a house is within an HCA and 800 metres from the station under TOD, they can do apartments or townhouses with no issue, but if they want to keep it as it is as a house and renovate, they will be subject to all the rules for HCA via DA?
The TOD is 400 metres, not 800, but the answer is yes. Work on buildings within an HCA or heritage listed items would still occur by way of a DA under the DCP and LEP.
Okay, great. Next question. What difference would a change in government make to these plans? Next election will be before January 2027.
Again, very hard for me to speculate on that, though the opposition has said that they would repeal parts of this policy. I suppose the question is what sorts of developments and how much development actually occurs between now and the next election.
Yeah.
So again, very hard to speculate on that.
Bit of crystal balling there.
Yep.
Next question. How can we help the government understand that the best way to fight climate change is to plant trees and not rip out 26,000 trees? Isn't the government considering that we are in a climate emergency?
I don't know that the government has ever acknowledged a climate emergency. At a very high level, there are sustainability reasons for putting additional development onto train lines, in particular mass transit routes. But you would have to say, as a planner, I would say there's been a little bit of a pendulum swing too far, because there will be consequences to biodiversity, to tree cover, to lots of things, to amenity as a consequence of this policy. I wouldn't call it soft density. This is very, very hard density.
Okay, thank you. And the last question for now, is there a realistic minimum lot size for residential flat buildings? For example, are we going to see smaller lots of 200 to 300 square meters with new apartment buildings going up?
This slide is probably a good one because it illustrates the low and mid-rise housing set. There are no minimum lot sizes and no minimum frontages either exhibited or proposed under the policy refinements. So you could see single lots develop. This is my personal view as a planner, and may not be one supported by the councillors or the council itself when it comes to make policy decisions. But at a theoretical level, it is you will get better design and massing of buildings and deep soil planting if you amalgamate sites. But that certainly at the moment isn't council's adopted position. Their adopted position in relation to the TODs is to challenge the TOD. But you can get better design outcomes on a larger site. You can get proper underground parking. You can get proper setbacks that you won't get on a single lot.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, that was the last question in the Q&A box. So if anybody has anything burning, please type away. We'll just give you a few seconds to do that. Otherwise, we'll look at wrapping up. Now, these slides will be posted on our website. We do have some information up there already, recordings of the Gordon face-to-face session, and the slides from previous sessions as well. So you can look at them this evening, and yeah, we'll aim to get these up online tomorrow. And of course, you can reach out to us with any questions about any of this stuff whenever you like. We're here to help where we can. So really, I'll look to wrap up. Andrew, thank you very much for your presentation this evening. Thank you everyone for attending. I hope you found it useful. There was a lot of information there, but hopefully some of it's gone in, and you'll be able to, that will help you in the future. So I'll wrap up. I'll say thank you, and I'll wish you a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.